social development among adolescents, it makes good sense to look at their peers. And when we're talking about peers, let's talk about friendships. There are a number of things that define friendship, but the degree to which the conditions of friendship become evident in peer interactions increases with age during development. And in the workshop, we're going to explore that a little more. But let's move on. There are costs and benefits to friendships in adolescence. You'll remember some of the costs from when we were talking about brain development. And in terms of benefits, friendships provide students with emotional support and security and help buffer unpleasant events. Glick and Rose's research in 2011 is really interesting. They tracked a group of Year 3 to Year 9 students across the course of one school year. And they explored different strategies for dealing with social stresses. And they related this to the friendship quality that students had with a reciprocated friend. And those qualities were about validation and caring, companionship and guidance. Now, the findings from that study were that different indicators of friendship adjustments had unique effects on strategies in response to helping tasks. Having more friends predicted decreases in avoidant or hostile strategies. Having high-quality friendships predicted emotionally engaged strategies that involved talking about the problem. And when having more friends predicted increases in relatively disengaged strategies like distraction and acting like the problem never happened, having high-quality friendships predicted decreases in those strategies. The study also tested whether their strategies at the start of the school year predicted changes in friendship adjustments towards the end of the school year. And only strategies which may be seen as major friendship transgressions, such as avoiding or blaming a friend when that friend encounters a problem, predict changes in friendships over time. And what the results tell us is that they're exploring the interplay between social competencies and friendship experiences, and the results suggest that friendships may provide a critical venue for the development of important relational skills. There are many different types of peer groups. You should know most of this from the reading. So there's cliques, which are generally small groups, friendship networks of about 5 or 6 people at most, generally of the same sex and the same age. And they're defined by their common activities. They're a group that study together regularly, or perhaps they're simply friendship groups, so a group of young people who have lunch together every day at school, or a group of young people who have grown up together. They provide the main social context for interaction. They're a place for children and young people to hang out, to talk to each other, to form close friendships. People in cliques know each other pretty well. Crowds, though, are quite different. So they're groups of individuals that don't necessarily affiliate with one another, but they are presumed to have or share similar values, attitudes and behaviours. They may share common features like ethnicity or a shared place. And studies across several generations and different geographic areas reveal similarly themed crowds. Athletically oriented people, deviant groups, high status elite groups, academically oriented groups, and adolescents who are required by a low frequency of affiliation with other people. So that gives us jocks, burnouts, populars, brains, and loners. Now, that research was almost exclusively with white American groups, and I would be very interested to see a recent study in Australia that looks at a more diverse population base. But the research that we're talking about here suggests that groupings such as cliques and crowds serve important, unique development functions among at least a subset of adolescents. But crowds are not settings for close personal interactions. Let's have a look at crowds a little more. Because crowds help us locate adolescents within a social structure of the school, and it can channel from crowd to clique, where your young people have more association with some peers than other peers. Now, this is a really important function at a time when many adolescents are entering new schools and interacting with a greater number of peers, and the crowd system actually acts as a social map to help adolescents select possible friends and romantic partners, judge the potential success of interpersonal overtures, and maintain their peer relationships. Adolescents are able to define themselves through their identifications with their peer groups. And at a time when they haven't yet found themselves fully, their crowd is an important basis for their self-definition. And it is through the exploration of different roles and different identities they will come to locate themselves. And I can't help but every time I think about crowds, I go back to that scene in 10 Things I Hate About You where Michael orients Cameron to the crowds at Padua High School. If we have a look at Prinstein and LaGreca, that research was done in 2002 and had a sample of 246 youth, 148 girls and 98 boys. And the children and young people, completed measures of depression, social anxiety, loneliness and self-esteem when they were in grades 4 to 6. That was time 1. And then 6 years later, the same students completed those measures. So they were at that point, they're in year 10 to 12. At time 2, the adolescents also reported about their self-concept and their identification with reputation-based peer crowds, including populars, jocks, brains, burnouts, nonconformists and average crowds. And the results indicate that adolescents' report of peer crowd affiliation was concurrently associated with self-concept and levels of internalising distress. Really interesting thing is the follow-back analysis, where they went back to look at what these young people had reported at time 1 when they were in grades 4 to 6. And those follow-back analyses of internalising trajectories revealed that the populars and the jocks had experienced significant declines in internalising distress across their development, whereas the brainy folks exhibited increases in internalising distress between childhood and adolescence. Now, crowds change over time. That's fairly self-explanatory, really. As the young people mature, the significance of the crowds declines, and this is because they are becoming more, their self-esteem and self-understanding and so on are becoming more internalised rather than influenced by outside factors. Let's have a look at cliques, which is, of course, those small groups of sort of 2 to 5 or 6 people. So cliques, these are peer groups that interact regularly, that have a defined sense of membership. They could even formulate norms of how to look and dress and act. As I said, they're small groups. They interact frequently and children and adolescents spend more time with their cliques than they do with their parents or their siblings. So we're talking about often cliques start out as same-sex groupings that have similar values and similar activity preferences, and they are quite unstable in middle childhood. By the time we hit middle adolescence, we've got shared sex membership, so we've got boys and girls interacting, and they've usually hit that point where they've got a distinct dress code or a distinct dialect. There's some sort of behaviour or norm that sets their group apart from other people. In terms of that relative instability, when you look at years 4 to 5, that turnover rate is about 50% over the school year. But between ages 11 to 18, we find that there's increasing numbers of young people who have ties to many different cliques, that the cliques themselves become much more stable. In year 7, 10% of those cliques have got both boys and girls, but always there is that high value on conforming.